So we'll continue with the Dvar Malchus. We're up to in the third siman, in the topic of state Kufes B'Mois HaMashiach. And we did in the first chelek, the first part of this, we did from, this is Siman Gimel, we did from Ois Aleph through Ois Tes. And now we will continue from Ois Yud till the end of the Sikha, the end of this Dvar Malchus, the end of Ois Gimel. So previously, the Rebbe pointed out that even though the Rambam says that there won't be any change in the custom of the world from the way it was conducted till Mashiach, it'll continue that way, but still that only applies to the time and the beginning when Mashiach arrives. But later on, even the Rambam will agree there's Chiyas HaMesim that there will be other time, a second period in which there will be outstanding and unnatural and not kimin haga olam. The proof is from Chiyas HaMesim itself. So therefore the Rebbe concludes that what the Rambam over here is talking about specifically is the time when Mashiach comes. The period that Mashiach comes, when he's discussing in Perek Yud Beis, there won't be a change in the world. He's talking about when Mashiach's arrival. And the Rebbe continued to explain now in Ois Yud, that is why the Rambam doesn't find it necessary to prove this statement, this halacha, that there is no change between Yemos HaMashiach. Earlier, when he discussed that Mashiach doesn't have to make an Oisei Meifes, he brings a proof from Rabbi Akiva. If you take a look and you see that in Perek Yud Beis, when the Rambam writes in Perek Yud Aleph, so when the Rambam writes Al Yale Al Daitchosh HaMelech HaMashiach Tzorich Lasis Oisis U'Meifsim U'Mechadish Dvorim Ba'olam Mechayim Meisim, all these things that is not going to have to be Mechayim Meisim. He's not going to have to do Oisis U'Meifsim. So he says, don't think so. Ein Adover Kain Shaharei Rabbi Akiva Chochem Godel. He was a great sage. As the Rebbe has mentioned several times within the Sikha. So here in Perek Yud Aleph, over here, the Rambam brings a proof when he talks about Mashiach. In Perek Yud Beis, over here, the Rambam is talking about what is going to be the Yemos HaMashiach. Perek Yud Aleph, he talks about Bias HaMashiach. What is Mashiach? What do we need to prove on who Mashiach is going to be and what he's going to do? Perek Yud Beis is talking about the standing of the world. So here the Rambam also says, Al Yala Alev Shevimesa Mashiach Yivatul Davar Mimin Hoga Shaloilom Oyeh Shom Chidush Ma'asav Reishis Eloilom Kimin Hoga Hoilach. The Rambam doesn't bring you any proof to this, that the world isn't going to change. Like he brought the proof before Lagabe Melech HaMashiach that he doesn't have to prove miracles. Because this period that the Rambam is discussing over here, Yemos HaMashiach, is a direct follow-up to the previous perek of the coming of Mashiach. Since Mashiach doesn't have to prove and hasn't have to bring any change, that's why we don't need a proof for the Oisei Meifsim. So therefore, when we said before that Mashiach in the previous halacha, as the Rambam brought the evidence from Ben Kuziva, Tzorich Lasis Oisei Meifsim, and since we're talking about that period of time, it means already this proof that we said that there's not going to be Oisei Meifsim to prove Mashiach's coming, That means that during his period, when he comes, as he says now in Perikut Beis, doesn't have to be Minhag Shel Olam, because if there would be Minhag Shel Olam, Davar Batul, that would have been that it would be a change, then that would be the Mashiach would have to bring it. But because we are discussing here the first period of the coming of Mashiach, what the standing of the world, so therefore it just follows the previous halacha. Let's look inside now. Oisyud. Move on, based on this, that this is the period that the Rambam is discussing here, is the beginning of the Mesa Mashiach. And then there will be another time of Mashiach. But here, this is Mesa Mashiach, is move on. We understand Masha B'tchilas Perik Yud Beis, in the beginning of Perik Yud Beis. When the Rambam writes, Al Yala Al Halev, don't enter your heart. Don't think Shabi Mesa Mashiach Yivatul Davar Mimin Hoki Shaloilom, that in Mashiach's days there will be some change in the custom of the world. He doesn't bring any proof, any evidence for that. Rambam just writes, Al Yala Al Halev Shabi Mesa Mashiach Yivatul Davar Min Hoki Shaloilom. The Rambam just addresses now a challenge to this concept, but he doesn't prove the fact itself. But in Perik Yud Aleph, he proved it, that the Melech HaMashiach, when he talks about Mashiach. But here he doesn't have to prove it that way. And the reason is, Kifisha maybe with Perik Shalifin is that like he brings in the previous Perik, the fact that Mashiach is not required to do any sign or proof. What does the Rambam write in Perik Yud Aleph? Shouldn't enter your mind. That King Mashiach needs to do signs and proofs, and to make new things in the world, make up new novelties in the world, or to resurrect the dead, or similar to these things. So he says, that is not the case. Rabbi Akiva was a great sage. He was from the sages of the Mishnah. He was carrying the vessel, means he followed him. He carried his vessel of the king Ben Kuziva. And he would say about him, that he is King Mashiach. And he and all the sages of his generation imagined that he was King Mashiach. Until, due to our sins, he died. And once he died, then it was known to them. So, but they assumed that he would be Mashiach, which means he qualified for what Mashiach needs to be. And then when he died, they found out that he's not Mashiach. But in the beginning, there was no question. The sages didn't ask him to prove that you're Mashiach. They just followed him. So that means to say that we don't have to bring a proof that he's Mashiach. So here the Rambam brings evidence to the fact that we don't have to ask Mashiach, but he doesn't bring evidence to the fact that in Moshe Mashiach there will be no change. Even though in these two chapters, the Rambam discusses two different topics, two different aspects. The Perek Yud Aleph Oides Melech HaMashiach Atzmei, in chapter 11, the one before the last, he discusses about the King Mashiach himself. Mashahu Yichadish, what is he gonna come up with? What is he gonna bring to the world? And also like his coming, as the Rambam discusses in the beginning from the psukim of Bilam, what Mashiach will do and how he will come. And in Perek Yud Beis, the Rambam discusses this matzav ha'olam b'Meisa Mashiach. Over there, he discusses what is the condition, what is the standing, how is the world going to be in the Meisa Mashiach. Hare, b'Peirik. So the answer is, so how come the Rambam doesn't have to bring the evidence over here in the second, and when talking about the situation of what the world is going to be when Mashiach comes? So in Perik chapter 12, it's talking about the standing of the world, kifisha zakoshur, as it's tied in Bias HaMashiach, with the coming of Mashiach. The Rebbe said, this is the first kufa. This is what we're discussing over here, is what the world is going to be like when Mashiach comes. And therefore, haraya shebeperik yudalef lagabe melech hamashiach. So the proof in chapter 11, when he discussed the melech hamashiach, that evidence, since we brought proof that Mashiach himself doesn't have to bring any proof, is that is enough. That is sufficient relative to what is discussed in the 12th Perek. How the world would stand, which is tied to his coming. Not a further something else that will take place. We're talking about directly how it relates to when he comes. And from there, she'olam kimin hagei. No. So therefore, we know that the world is coming kimin hagei. For, as the Rebbe explained, shekain. For, im hageder di meisa Mashiach hoy bitl min hagei shel olam. If Mashiach's coming was that the conduct, the nature of world would have changed, there would have been a new concept in the act of creation. Then that would turn out that is what Mashiach is. So because, what does it mean? It means that part of Mashiach's coming would be that there will be changes in the world. The coming of Mashiach includes in it that there will be, part of it would be the negation of the custom of the world, a change in the way the world is, and there would be a chiddush in the Ma'aseh Bereishis. There would be a novelty in the Ma'aseh Bereishis. Then it would have been that Mashiach tzarich lasis oisus mefsim umechadish dvarim ba'olam. Then Mashiach would have needed, Rambam says he doesn't need to, but if Mashiach brings a change, a part of the coming of Mashiach involves a change in the nature of the world, so then it should turn out that Mashiach should have to provide signs and proofs umechadish dvarim ba'olam, and to make new things in the world to prove that he's Mashiach. And that would be the test. That would be the checkup. How would we determine the truth of Mashiach? Because that way, that was the novelty. That is the Chiddush of Mashiach. And since the Rambam proved from Rabbi Akiva and all the people of his generation as it relates to Ben Kaziva, he brings down a Perek Yudalef that Mashiach's coming does not involve to check out Mashiach by doing some sort of a sign or a proof. But that's not it, because Mashiach is not there to make any changes in the world. And because that's why we see that they didn't ask from Ben Kuziva to bring any proof to it. So from this it's understood and it's evident that the coming of Mashiach does not bring with it the negation of the way of the world. Basically, the situation of the world in the beginning of Mashiach, the Rebbe says, is what the Rambam is talking in Perik Yud Beis, and that's why that doesn't need any special evidence, because if Mashiach's job is not to prove Oisem Meifsim, as the Rambam proves from Ben Kusiva, from Rabbi Akiva, that he didn't ask for Oisem Meifis, so that means that Mashiach is not going to do that, Oisem Meifsim, and we don't need to prove that b'Meisem Mashiach it's not going to happen, because that's evident, because that's not the idea of Mashiach. Had Mashiach needed to bring or do change, the world changed, then it would have needed another proof. So that means that is the discussion in Perik Yud Beis. The Perik Yud Beis is talking the beginning of the time of Mashiach, and we don't need a special, very special proof for that. And the Rebbe continues now in Ois Yud Aleph. Move on. Based on this, we understand that what the Rambam is doing in Perik Yud Beis is basically describing to us what the situation is going to be in the time of Mashiach. Mashiach will bring about in Perik Yud Aleph, he will gather the Yidden, bring them together. He'll bring in a wholesomeness in a Torah, and the Torah will be practices in a world which is normal to its fullest extent. Move on. That the length in the explanation of the Rambam in chapter 12 about the situation of the world during the time of Mashiach. That is all as it relates to the concept and the time in days of Mashiach, as it's connected, it's tied to King Mashiach and his coming. So what does this mean? In chapter 11, Mevair Harambam, the Rambam explains Mahu Inyone Shel Melech HaMashiach. What is the idea? What is Melech HaMashiach? And the Rambam writes there, Melech HaMashiach Osid Lamed, that the King Mashiach is destined to stand up. Ulahachzin Malchus David Liyoshna, he'll bring back the David kingdom to its old Lememshola Rishoina, to its first ruling as it was. Ubeina HaMikdash, he'll build the Mikdash. And he will gather in those who were pushed away of the Yidden in all Golus, in all corners. And all the laws come back. So David HaMelech is going to bring he will bring this wholesomeness in the mitzvahs and the laws of the Torah, as the Rebbe discussed in the very first Sikha that we learned over here. That's the Sikha that we learned before, that the Melech HaMashiach's job is going to bringing a shleimus in the mitzvahs and Hilchos HaTorah, because you can only really become the Torah fully when it is done through a Melech, the Malchus Beis David with a Beis HaMikdash. And Achar Kach, so that's the first thing he talks about, what Melech HaMashiach is going to do. And then the Perik Yud Beis, Koi HaRambam, then the Rambam discusses Kifi Shematzav Ha'olam Yiyah Be'esem Lekach, how this world situation is going to be fitting to this Kifi Shu Messiah. So what is the world going to look like, since once Mashiach is going to bring about that change, that building of the Beis HaMikdash and Kabetz Nidchei Yisrael? Kashu Messiah, as he concludes, Shabnei Yisrael Yiyu Pnuyim B'Torah, that the Yidden will be free to study Torah v'chochmos and its wisdom. Ubeis Azman, and in that time Le'yeh Shom Le'rov Le'milchama, there will be no hunger, no war. Chulu. What is going to be the entire occupation of the world is not going to be Ella, only L'das Hashem B'levad, only to know Hashem. That's what everybody's going to be occupied. And that's why the Yidden, the Yisrael, will be great wise people, great sages. And the Iker, but mainly, that the mitzvahs of the Torah will be conducted in a world as the world goes on, as the Minhag Olam. And that's all going to take place in that time of Yemei Mashiach, and this is the situation from the world. In Oishid Beis, the Rebbe is now mechadish that when the Rambam says that the pasuk of Gor Zevim Keves doesn't mean literally, he's talking about those pesukim which are written in association with the coming of Mashiach. The pesukim that talk in association with the coming of Mashiach, as V'yotza Choter Megezer Yishai, the beginning of the Nevuah, in which it says V'gor Zevim Keves, since it's talking about Bisa Mashiach, that is not Kipshutei. But the other prophecies which are not associated with the coming of Mashiach, the Rambam also says that they're Kipshutei, because the Rambam in Perek Yud Beis is talking about what's going to be when Mashiach comes in that Zman. And therefore, that pasuk which talks about when Mashiach is coming, itake doesn't mean literally. Even though the Rambam over here also suggests with regards to other psukim, but he's talking about other psukim as they associate with the coming of Mashiach. The Rambam's mainly interest is to tell us over here that learning Torah is going to be in abundance when Mashiach comes, in a way of peace, and nobody's going to be no distractions and no interferences. So he brings down V'gor Zevim Keves as this mashal. Let's look inside. Oishid Beis. Apikol Anal Yuvan Gam Shitas Rambam. Based on all the above, we can also understand the view of the Rambam. The Rambam explained the two different periods in the coming of Mashiach. We also understand how the view of the Rambam b'shaychuso shel hapsukim, how the verses connect Umamore Chazal Hashonim and the various statements, sayings of our sage of blessed memory, as far as these promises that we were promised of the future. Those promises, those prophecies that discuss about Mashiach himself, Shehu Yased, that which he's going to do, and the results that will take place through his coming. Loimed harambam, the Rambam learns them, she'einam inyan shel bitl min hoge shel olam. They are not a matter of negating the custom of the world. And that's why he translates the verse, V'gor Zevim Keves Goymer, which because of that is written behemshech as a follow-up. It follows Leviyotzo Choter Megezer Yishai Goymer. In the beginning, the Nevuah, it says that there will come out a Choter Megezer Yishai, which is referencing Moshiach. Shezeh Moshel V'chida. He says that's only a parable Chida. Umevar Befeder says HaMoshel V'chida Shel HaPosuk, and he clearly, this part of the Moshel, he clearly articulates that the Jews will be able to sit securely while there's going to be Rishi Akum, there's going to be the Shem of Akum. So that he says to finish, and even though he continues and he says, also the similar verses that speak these matters with regards to Mashiach are parables, and he does not tell you what the mashal is. And on the contrary, not only doesn't he tell you, but he says that we don't even know. In the times of King Mashiach, everything which was a mashal. So the Rambam doesn't bother telling you how the mashal is going to be. Still talking about those mishalim that are associated with the coming of Mashiach. because what the Rambam is mainly intending, to explain, that this pasuk that follows the beginning of a Yotzer Cheter talking about Mashiach, in this pasuk, it articulates, it tells you what Mashiach is going to be. That the Yidden will have no confusions and no distractions from the nation of the world. As the Rambam concludes, they will be free in Torah Chachmasa. So he only explains this one verse because that verse helps him to bring out what the idea of Mashiach is. But that applies to the verses that discuss as they associate with the coming of the Mashiach. So those are not interpreted in the literal sense, which would be miraculous, because that would go against the proof that the Rambam proved that Mashiach doesn't have to show any miracles. As opposed to the verses and the saying of our sages that do not follow, don't flow the coming of Mashiach. Mashiach is coming. But rather they discuss those prophecies and those promises that are going to take place for the future to come, which would include those that we mentioned earlier, which the Ravid mentioned. I will destroy cease the Baram from the world, from the earth. And they mentioned Meir Razal both in the Teres Kahanim and in the Gemara in the end of Kesubas, that the on-bearing tree, non-bearing fruit will start producing fruit. The Rambam actually explains they're talking not a parable. It means literally. It doesn't talk about the coming of Mashiach. It talks about what's going to happen. He agrees. Just like Tchisa Mason that I've proved before. This will take place on a later time, a later period. It'll be a time within the coming of Mashiach itself in which these miracles will take place. In Oishid Gimel, the Rebbe will explain now the difference in the languages of the Gemara, in which the Gemara in Ksubah says specifically Eretz Yisrael. That talks about the first Tekufa, because there's a difference between Eretz Yisrael and the rest of the world, because in the first Tekufa, there isn't going to be really a change in the world. But like the Radvaz said earlier, it's going to be only in Eretz Yisrael. There's going to be, this Mandomer holds in Eretz Yisrael. But when the Teres Kohanim talks about that it's going to be the whole world, that's Ilon Yisrak, that's going to be in the second period. Let's look inside. Oishid Gimel. Apiyanal Yuvan, based on the above, would also understand Gam Hachiluk, also the difference between Hamaimer b'Teres Kohanim v'Hamaimer b'Ksubas, between this statement, the saying in the Teres Kohanim, and the Memra and the saying in the end of Kesubas. Hagemara b'Ksubas, the Gemara in Ksubas, Asidin Kolis Lonis Rakshe be'Eretz Yisrael Sheyit Anu Peris. So both of them, it says specifically Eretz Yisrael. It says Yit Anu, as the Rebbe has brought out earlier. That means that's going to be a not natural way, and it's only going to be in Eretz Yisrael. That points to the fact that this isn't a natural phenomenon, but it's something specific. It's toyen, and it's only in Eretz Yisrael. That goes in the first period. So although the Rambam says there's not going to be any changes, but according to this opinion and the Gemara Ksubas, Chidush Nes Beretz Yisrael is going to be a Chidush Nes Beretz Yisrael Yitanu. All of a sudden, that in that time, that's that opinion. Mashenkin b'Teres Kahanim, Shekoyis Stam Afiloni Srak Asidim Lius Oisim Pedus. He writes in a general way. He doesn't say it's Yisrael, and he doesn't say that they're going to be toyen, but he says in general that Ilon Yisrak will produce fruit. That's going to become the nature of these trees. And this is going to take place in all the world. That is talking about the second period in the days of Mashiach. Then there is going to be a change of a new kind that's a novelty in the act of creation. Then there's going to also be the nature of Gam Shalil and Srak, also the non-bearing fruit tree is also going to start to give fruit. So it turns out that the Teres Kahanim and the Gemara and Ksubis are talking about different periods, not necessarily mechulak with each other, and could be that way. But according to the Rambam, the way we learned before, the Rambam says there's going to be no change, so he cannot follow the opinion of the Gemara, as the Rebbe said before, that if there's a change in Eretz Yisrael, that's be still a change of Shinu Shel Olam. So that's what the Rebbe rejected earlier, the interpretation of the Radvaz, who makes this chiluk between Eretz Yisrael. But over here, the Rebbe is explaining, but that's the difference between the Gemara and the Mechilta. In the Mechilta, we can say that there's not going to be the first period. The Mechilta doesn't talk about the first period. But the Gemara definitely holds that in Eretz Yisrael, there's going to be that change, as the Rebbe explains. In Ois Yudaled, the Rebbe goes back now to answer the question that it seems that the Rambam contradicts himself, that in one hand he writes that there is not going to be any change in the times of Mashiach, and yet he rules like the other, like the Mandomar that says that the Nevi'im were prophesizing for the time of Mashiach, which means there will be miracles. And the Rebbe says, because these are two separate periods within Mashiach. Ein ben Elam Hazeh leMeisa Mashiach is talking about the Tkufa at the beginning, but then there's no difference. But when it says Kol Hanevim leNibu Elo leMeisa Mashiach, this refers to the later period. Let's look inside. Yudab al Pizem, move on. She'ein stirim medivra Rambam, so that it doesn't contradict the Rambam. There's no contradiction. The Rambam's words, he says, She'ein bein Elam Hazeh leMeisa Mashiach el Shibud Malchus Bilvad. So the Rambam says that there's no difference, like Shmuel. Now, there is no difference between Olam Hazeh and the Yemei Mashiach. The only difference is that there is not going to be enslavement of the nation. So that means technically that there is not going to be any special miracles in the times of Mashiach. And then we have the Rambam saying that the Nevi'im were Nisnabu Limoisa Mashiach, which means the Nevi'im were Nisnabu these great miracles. And the answer is, the Rambam is talking about this thing on the first period in the Moshe Mashiach of there is not going to be any miracles. And there's no contradiction because that that what the Rambam is bringing down is the later period in the times of Mashiach. And also, as a result, we asked before, move on, Psake Hasheni, it's understood the other ruling, the Rambam rules, that one who goes out on Shabbos with ammunition, with war vessels you use for war, would be chayv achatas, because the ruling is that they're going to be bottled. There's going to be no need for them. That means it's going to be bottled min hogesh shalolam. How does the Rambam say there's no bittul min hogesh shalolam? Because this pasuk that it says they will put their plowshares into the swords into plowshares, which is a phenomenal shekoyi, that this is talking about, it's going to be in the future. The Rambam also learns that it loyme the Rambam kipshoto. This means literally, this is not just a marshal, it means it's going to happen. But when is this going to happen? within the later period, Mesa Mashiach is going to be this phenomenal, extraordinary phenomenal in which people will not have any war, no need for any swords. When is this going to take place? Not immediately, not in the beginning, will come in the end. This will be fulfilled on a later period in the days of Mashiach. But the bottom line is, but since the ammunition, these war tools will be nullified, there's no use for them in that period. Let it be the last one I call upon him, so let it be that it's still gonna be in the days of the beginning of Mashiach, but the Tkufa Shni is no longer gonna be. So that's already evidence that ammunition tools are not, war tools are not tachshitim, because if they're tachshitim, they shouldn't even be bottled in the second period. So therefore, the Rambam rules that you be chai v'chatos. And when the Rambam says Ein bein Mesa Mashiach li elushim v'gol b'lvad, he's talking about the Tkufa Rishayna. In Ois Yud Gimel, in Ois, we're up to here. In Ois Tezvav, the Rebbe explains another seemingly difficulty with this mahalach, that the Rambam learns that Ein ben Elam Hazeh leMoshe Mashiach. He's talking about the Tkufa Rishayna. Mashenkein, in the Gemara, it's talking about in all of the coming of Mashiach, as the pashtus of the Gemara is that Ein ben Elam Hazeh leMoshe Mashiach, and that's why Pligi ad Reb Chia bar Abba, Pligi ad Shmuel. But in the Gemara, there is two statements that follow. That when we say the Kol HaNeviim Kulam Lo Nisnabu Elam Hazeh and not Li Moshe Mashiach, the Gemara says this goes Pligi ad Shmuel. This says Ein ben Elam Hazeh. Then the Gemara says Kol HaNeviim Lo Nisnabu. Rabbi Chia says the Baal Tzadikim, Aval Baal Tshuva, Aval Tzadikim Wun, Ein L'Roz Elakim Zolasacha. Basically, there's two statements over here that from Rabbi Chia bar Abba and Rabbi Yechonah. One statement is that the Tzadikim are greater than Baal Tshuva. That's what is the second statement. And the other statement is that in Yemei Mashiach there is going to be wondrous time, and then the Rambam uses one of them and not the other one. It seems in the Gemara they're connected. Let's look. It didn't explain well, but let's look inside. We'll see. There's an additional. The Gemara Hanal, the Gemara that discusses that Kol HaNeviim Lo Nisnabu Elo L'Moshe Mashiach. So that's based on the posik Elikim Zlosecha. This is only for the Neviim, but the greater they didn't see. So Muva Behemshech Lezeh, and the Gemara brings as a follow-up to us to say that all the Neviim were Moshe Mashiach. But in the future, there's that's even higher than that. And another statement he says, which is also the same pasuk over there. Nobody knows but the Hashem. That is called Hanevim Kulam Lenisnaba Lebaletshuva. All the prophets, they prophesied about Baletshuva. Aval tzadikim gemurim, but if we talk about complete tzadikim, they're even greater. Over there, ayin leidos elikim zulasecha. Nobody besides Hashem has seen that. So just like he said that the Nevi'im nisnabu leMoshe Mashiach, but the Asid elikim leiro elikim zulasecha, same thing he's saying now. Kol Nevi'im nisnabu lebal tshuva, but for tzadikim there's even greater. And over here, before the Gemara says Peligi the Shmuel, because he's saying that the Moshe Mashiach will be the wonders. The Peligi the Shmuel. But here the Gemara says upligi d'Rababo, because he's saying that tzaddikim are higher level than Baalei Tshuva, because he's saying this only applies to Baalei Tshuva, but tzaddikim, nobody knows the reward for them. They're much greater. They must have pligi d'Rababo. Mokim shabaalei Tshuva. That where Baalei Tshuva stand, tzaddikim don't stand. That means the Baalei Tshuva are greater than tzaddikim. Why is he saying that the Old Nevi'im is the prophecies goes for Baalei Tshuva, but tzaddikim we don't know? No, tzaddikim are not greater than Baalei Tshuva. Is fakert. The Baalei Tshuva is greater than the tzaddikim. That's what the Gemara says. But Gemara Mavo is based on Memres. The Gemara brings both of these statements of Rabbi Chiya bar Abba in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, following one or the other. The first one about the fact that Elikim l'Rozul L'Secha, that is only Moshe Mashiach, but what the Olam in the future, the Loilero. And then it says the second statement that it's only for Baal Tshuva, not for Tzaddikim. Mashma, it appears Yesh Neshayches b'neim, that there is some connection between these two statements. So he said, Meres L'Shitose, they follow. Shekol Hanevim. According to his view, that Shekol Hanevim Kulav Le'nisnabu Elili Moshe Mashiach, if we say that all the Nevi'im were prophesying for Moshe Mashiach, so we have to say that they're only doing for the Baal Tshuva, they were prophesying. And therefore it's like about Bohu, who says that Tzaddikim Gemurim are not as great as Baal Tshuva, and also V'leiki Shmuel, that says that Ein Ben Elam Hazel Moshe Mashiach. But in the Rambam is a problem. Abu Matzinu Ber Rambam, that we're quoting the whole time here. So he paskins like the first statement of Rabbi Chiya bar Abba and Rabbi Yochanan, and yet he also paskins seems like a contradiction. He paskins like Rababo, and in the first case he paskins Rabbi Chiya bar Abba and Rabbi Yochanan, because he says, and in the statement, the second statement, he paskins like Rababo, that it's Mokush Tzadikim Gemurim, Baal Tshuva Tzadikim Gemurim Michal Lamed. But Pianal move on. But based on the above, that the Rambam learns that there's the two periods. The Rambam is learning about the first period, so it says like this. The idea of Rabbi Chiya bar Abba and Rabbi Yochanan that tzaddikim gemurim are greater than Baal Tshuvas. Harezel shitosei, this the shita, yeah, that is shagam b'tchilas yemei Mashiach yeh bittul minhag shel olam. It's going to be a bittul minhag shel olam. So if there's a bittul minhag shel olam in the beginning of Mesa Mashiach, then we have to say that and alzeh nisnabu kol hanevim. So therefore, we have to say there's two periods. So there's the period the lechatchila, that's for tzaddikim and Baal Tshuva, and then there's tzaddikim. Avol l'shitas harambam, but according to the Rambam, shem tchilas yimei Mashiach elo kimin hagin noyeg. But the Rambam's view is that the world is kimin hagin noyeg. That does not force us to say that tzaddikim greater than Baal Tshuva, and therefore, because there's not the only reason why we say that there's the second period that the greater is because we're talking about the in the Gemara where Rabbi Chiya bar Abba he's talking about the tchilas tkufas Moshe Mashiach. Then these two things are connected. Basically, these two memories are connected. If we're talking about B'tchilas Yimei Mashiach, then these two statements of Rabbi Chiya bar Abba Rabbi Yochanan are connected. But according to the Rambam, since Rabbi Chiya bar Abba Rabbi Yochanan's statement is not talking about B'tchilas Yimei only the beginning of Mashiach, and therefore that doesn't necessitate the other statement of Rabbi Chiya bar Abba Rabbi Yochanan. The Rebbe is not ma'arich over here explaining all how one would be machriach the other, but that's the kitzer that we see that this connection in the Gemara doesn't necessarily have to be according to the way the Rambam understands the Ein Bein Mesa Mashiach, that it's talking about the Tkufa Rishoina, as opposed to the Gemara, which both of these statements are talking about. Even Bitkufa Rishoina is going to be a bittul minhogish legum. In Oyster Zayin, the Rebbe explains why is it taka that there are two periods in the time of Mashiach, and how is the second period? Why are we saying that the second period is taking place? What brings it about? The Rebbe brings out that the coming of Mashiach, basically, there seems to be two possibilities, and the Rebbe will explain it's not really possibilities, but they are actually complementing one another. There is a situation where the Yidden are zochu, they have a merit. So after, regardless of when the Geula comes, even if it's not through zochu, they're still going to eventually come to the zochu, because at that point they're going to learn Torah Mekayim mitzvahs, and that will inevitably bring about that second alternative, the miraculous way, as we find in the Gemara, the seemingly conflict, how Mashiach is going to come. Is he going to come on clouds, or is he going to be riding a donkey? The Gemara says it depends on whether Zochu or Lo Zochu. And the same thing that the Rebbe explains, how is the Beis HaMikdash going to be built? Is it going to come down min hashamayim, or it's going to be built by Bnei Adam? As the Rebbe will explain, yes, it has to be, if it's had halacha, it has to be in the literal sense. And notwithstanding that the Rambam in his letters, he writes that it may be differently, and here he's writing in halacha in the minimally, but as the Rebbe will explain, these are the beginning of the possibilities, or maybe l'chatchila on the extravaganza and the zuchus, but even if not, it starts with halacha, with the simple, and then we come to the higher level. Let's look inside in Oyster Zayin. After we explained of the above, Adayin Choser Bir, we're still missing some explanation. Since that the definition, what is the days of Mashiach? That which follows the coming of Mashiach, Koshur L'das Rambam. So according to the Rambam's view, it's connected, it's tied, so that the world is conducted as it is. What forces us to say that within the days of Mashiach, that in the Moisa Mashiach itself there will be another period of time in which there will be bittul min hagish halaylam. Since Mashiach is not connected to bittul min hagish halaylam, why do we have to say? The Rebbe said before, because Tchias HaMeisim is evidence, but that itself, as the Rebbe asks, we're saying that it doesn't have to be right away. So what forces us to say? But as the Rebbe asks in the further, mainly what the Rebbe wants to know, likewise, and mainly, what would be that wondrous cause that changes all of a sudden, that is going to bring and going to cause this wonderful surprise and novelty, the conduct in that second period. And the Rebbe says, we'll understand this by introducing the words of the Rambam in the letter of Tchias HaMeisim that he wrote. Shama Shepir, the Rambam writes like this. Shama Shepir Shesayudim Dilosid. This that he interpreted, the promises of the future. The parenthesis, that the wolf will live with the sheep or similar. He said this is merely an example, a parable, and a riddle. Those are not absolute. That's what we said are not absolute, that these are just a parable. It's possible that they will be fulfilled literally. So, but it would seem based on the Rebbe's explanation before in Yud Yud Beis, that there's no necessary sign for Mashiach, and the Bias of Mashiach is dependent. The Rambam doesn't have to be approved because it's all we don't need in the time of Mashiach. We don't need proofs for that, and that's how Rabbi Akiva thought that Ben Koziva was Mashiach. So so we have to learn Shayudim Hamedabrim B'Kesher LeMashiach U'Biyosei, those promises that talk about Mashiach and his coming. Maybe the other ones, but these promises that the Rambam says that as if they tied to Mashiach and his coming, they're not negating anything from the conduct of the world. Because what is the definition? What is Mashiach? To novelty, to bring about in the world as the world conducts itself in its custom, dafke kinis kalil, as mentioned before, and not to bring about a change of the nature of the world. So why are we saying that there is a second period over here, and how is that going to take place? If we are forced to say, how could the Rambam say Nigeres Chiyis HaMeisim that it's possible that it should not be so? So so we can say the explanation of this is Yadua Divrei HaGemara. The Gemara is known the words of the Gemara, Legabe Stiras HaPsukim, seemingly the contradiction of the verses, that in one verse, Ksiv, it says Varu, and they will fly with the Imanane Shmaya Kibar Inish Ato, like a person, like a human. That's the way they're going to fly with the clouds. But Uksiv, that is a miraculous way that Mashiach is going to come on clouds. Uksiv, but then there's another verse that says, that is going to be like a poor person riding on a donkey. Seems to be a contradiction. So the Gemara answers that Zochu Imanane Shemaya, if they have the merit, then they will fly with the clouds in the skies. But if Loi Zochu, if they don't have a Zochus, they're not merit, Ani Rechav Al Chamayr, I will be like a poor person riding on a donkey. So basically, which means that there's two possibilities when Mashiach will come. Either he's going to come in a situation of Zochu, and then it's going to be in a miraculous way that they're going to fly with the clouds in the skies, or he's going to be in a non-miraculous way, Loi Zochu, and not in a merit way, then it's going to be a poor person riding on a donkey. Similarly, the Gemara answers, other places the Gemara answers also other Pesukim in a similar way. The Gemara in Sanhedrin over there, as the Gemara brings down the resolution of the conflict between these two verses and other verses in the Gemara there. Move on. So from this, it's understood as it applies to the other matters that are in the days of Mashiach. When the Yidden find themselves in a situation in which they are meritorious, they are Zechus, then all matters are done in a different way, legamri. Totally, then everything is done in a miraculous way. What Rebbe is saying is that the possibilities are depending upon the Zochu or not Zochu. So when the Rambam writes that it's possible that it'll be literally because there's two possibilities. And the Rebbe adds, this is also how we explain the conflict between the Beis Hamikdash being built up from above and coming down, or where Mashiach is going to build it. This is one of the ways to reconcile Ba Plukta in the disagreement Lagabe Binyan Hamikdash L'Osid with regards to the building of the Beis Hamikdash in the future. The Kama Mekoimis, in many areas, in many places, Muvosha Hamikdash Hashlishi, it's brought that the third Beis Hamikdash, Banu Yumeshuchlol Hu Yugala V'Yovim Mishamayim. It's built, it's completely ready, it's going to be revealed, it's going to come from the heavens. But Ubemokem Achar, and elsewhere Muva is brought down V'chein Posek HaRambam, and actually the Rambam paskins over here, Shemashiach Bein HaMikdash, that Mashiach will build a Mikdash, and it's not going to come down already Min HaShamayim. So this actually depends on these two ways, the way the redemption above is going to take place. The im zochu, if it's going to be a merit, then it's going to be revealed. It's going to come from the heavens. If they did not merit, it's going to be building through the people. So that's going to depend on how the gula is going to take place. The Sefer Hayad is that the Rambam rules in the Sefer Hayad, which is a Sefer halachis, which is just the laws. That there will be no aspect in which the custom of the world will be negated. That it is because this whole idea of Mashiach and his coming and the redemption in generally, it's halacha. It's halacha berura psuka. It's a very clear and the rule halacha. Likewise, it's also how this matter is going to take place. It is not hinged on the way that the people do. So that, because independent whether the Yidden are Zeicha, they're not Zeicha, the Gula is going to come. That's the halacha. But when the redemption is going to come in a way that flying with these clouds of the skies are similar, that hinges on the fact that the Yidden are in a situation in which they're meritorious, that they have a zuchus. That is not like a halacha, that is not clear, it's not rule, we don't know that. Everything comes from heaven besides fear of heaven. So which means it's really up to the people. According to everybody has the right, meaning has the possibility, the option not to follow the Torah. So therefore, who knows that it's going to be Zochu? So the halacha is clear, is that Mashiach is going to come in the natural way. And therefore, Harambam Metayres HaGeula, the Rambam describes the Geula be'oifen in a situation because Shalpi halacha, the halacha muchrach liyis. That would has to happen. Without hinging on the standing of what the Yidden standing is. And that's why the Rambam writes like that. So the Rebbe explains now, deeper to understand it. We're not saying that the Rambam is only talking about a situation with Lo Zochu. But there are two steps. Step number one is what Mashiach is coming according to the Minhag Shel Olam, and then on top of that, there will be additional advantages. So he's talking about the first level, not Lo Zochu, but the first step. On top of that, we get the second step, which the Rambam alludes to in his letter of Tchis HaMesim, Yudches. Deeper, this that the Rambam describes the redemption. In a way that there is not going to be no negation of anything from the custom of the world. Who the reason is Es hageula. Is not that the Rambam is describing the redemption as it would come in a situation when they don't have a merit, God forbid, but rather Karambam Soiver, the Rambam's view is Shema Shomru Chazal, that this that our sages of blessed memory say Shebematzav de Zochu. You come of a Kama Iluima Noganisis Chulu. In the case of Zocha, there will be many and many elevations together with this miraculous conduct. That's an additional aspect, which is in addition to the definition of Mashiach. The Rambam writes what Mashiach is. Plus, there's additional things that take place later on. The Rambam doesn't say that. But he's not saying only when it's going to be Lo Zoch. So he says, this means like this. From the definition of Mashiach and his coming, the order is that the world goes in according to its custom. Because what is the new thing of Mashiach coming in halacha. What is that? Shal yodoi tiyah shlem is the key mitzvahs v'halacha shel Torah. Mashiach, through him there will be the wholesomeness of the observance, the fulfillment of the mitzvahs and the laws of Torah. Shezeh kosher im olam shekim min hogei noeg. That is tied to the world running in its normal way. Avol kasher b'nei Yisrael hem b'matzav naylo shel zachu. But when the Yidden are on a higher level of zechus, then there will be an additional aspect. Shakadosh Baruch Hu yare nisim, that Hashem will also show miracles kedei lahares, in order to show toisefes hachavivus, additional dearness, v'hamayla shel Yisrael, and the greatness of the Yidden. So the Rambam writes what the gather of Mashiach does not negate that there is an additional milah that will be shown to the Yidden as a greater level that they merit. A similar way, as we reconciled earlier, it's not either or. It's not either it's going to be min hashamayim or it's going to be through Mashiach. No. Not the fact that it's going to be revealed and come in Shemaim, so he said that it contradicts the Mashiach by the Mikdash, to the fact that Mashiach is going to build the Mikdash, but rather Shemitzad Geder HaHalocha, that from the definition of Halocha, Hare Inyan the Binyan Beis HaMikdash Uchiyuv Mitzvah al Bnei Yisrael. From Halocha's perspective, this concept of the building of the Beis HaMikdash is an obligation, a mitzvah on the Yidden. The pasuk says, make me a mikdash. Not that's going to come down. That's where the Rambam rules. Through Mashiach, all of the laws that the Rambam said writes in his days, as they were before, are going to come back. And they're going to appoint a king, and then Melech HaMashiach will build Beis HaMikdash. Melech HaMashiach yivatzeh as mitzvah bein Beis HaMikdash. So Melech HaMashiach is going to accomplish, is going to do the mitzvah of bein Beis HaMikdash. So what happens? But when there is a situation of a zochu, that impacts an addition that within the Mikdash Lamata, Yavai v'Yislabish will come and dress up. HaMikdash de Lamaila, the Mikdash above will come and be dressed up. Yavai v'Yigala Mishamayim, it's going to come and it's going to be revealed Mishamayim. So this is going to be an additional Haisofa to the Halacha, the minimal, the building of the Beis HaMikdash that is going to come down Min Hashemayim in the Beis HaMikdash that is built through Mashiach. Ois Yutes. Move on. So based on this, we understand. The absolute necessity that there is we're forced to say there is going to be a second period, within the days of Mashiach. Because after Mashiach's coming, in either way, whether Zoch or Lo Zoch, but Kivan Shelo Yiyah, Libnei Yisrael Negisum Mevatel. At that point, there will be nobody forcing, nobody negating. That is not going to allow them, Sheina Manichas Lem Lasik B'Torah, Ubi Mitzvahs Kogim, who's not going to allow them to occupy in Torah mitzvahs properly. V'adrab, and the contrary, Yiyu Pnuyim, B'Torah V'Chochmasa, they will be free to study Torah and the wisdom of Torah, Ad Shafilu, to the extent that even Asa Kol Ha'ilom, the occupation of the whole world, which is Kol Ha'umis, will be L'dasis Hashem Bilvad, will be just to know Hashem. That's why the Yidden will be great, wise people, like this, the wisdom will be as the water covers the world. So it'll be all covered. So the whole world will be covered with the knowledge of Hashem. That is the complete situation of Zochu, because they're doing everything properly now. So that has to bring along for the second period within the Moshe Mashiach, in which the custom of the world will be negated, will be nullified. The conduct of miraculous including the main fundamental aspect, that there will be the Tchiyas HaMeisim, that will be within that period. And the Rebbe over here sort of gives you an answer that he didn't clearly say earlier when he asked, what is the hechrech? There'll be a second Tkufa in Yemais HaMashiach, even though the Rambam said that is Tchiyas HaMeisim, but maybe Tchiyas HaMeisim is going to be outside of Yemais HaMashiach. But the Rebbe says now we have to say that the Tchiyas HaMeisim is within the Yemais HaMashiach, because within Yemais HaMashiach they come to the level of Zochu. And therefore, the Sefer Hayad, in the Sefer Hayad Sheboy Masbir HaRambam, as Gedrei Shel Mashiach Ubiyosi Alpi Halacha, in which the Rambam explains the definition of Mashiach and his coming based on the Halacha. He explains how the condition of the world will be Bizman Ve'ofen, in the time and in the way Shel Elam Kimin Hogin Noyeg, in the way that the world runs according to its custom. Fitting with the aspect and the definition of Mashiach. But when he writes the letter of the Tchiyas HaMeisim, resurrection of the dead, he adds, this explains more the Sefer Hayad. This is not absolute. For the Matzav Shel Zochu, that in the situation of Zochu, it's possible. It's not going to be two tkufas, but it's also possible that if it will be in a situation of Zochu, so even while we're in Golus, so then in actuality it will be take a betchilas hagula immediately in the beginning of the redemption. This special conduct from above, the conduct, the bitul min hogish aloilam, in which the customs of the world will be negated. And as the days that you left Egypt, the Eibishter will show us miracles, and that will happen b'meir of Yameinu.